Testing, can anybody hear us?
Yes, we can hear you.
10-4.
Good morning. The MAG Regional Council is now called to order. For those around the table, please turn on your microphone when speaking. For those participating via Zoom, please state your name when making a comment or asking a question. The MAG public comment process allows members of the public to comment on items on today's agenda or items that fall under MAG's jurisdiction. If you would like to comment at today's meeting, please fill out a request to speak card located in the information table in the hallway and give it to MAG staff. If you parked in the garage, parking validators are available on the information table in the hallway. If you purchased a transit ticket to come to the meeting, please see staff for a ticket. Hearing assisted devices are available from MAG staff. We will now begin the meeting with a roll call of all members.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Regional Council. I will go down the list of members alphabetically. Please unmute and indicate if you are present. Mayor Beck. Mayor Bian Wellner.
Here.
Thank you. President Burnett. Thank you. Mayor Crane.
Here.
Thank you. Ms. Daniels.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Dickey.
Here.
Thank you. Chair Gallego.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Giles.
Here.
Thank you. Supervisor Goodman.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Hall.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Hartke.
Here.
Thank you. President Javier.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Hermosillo.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor LaVault.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Governor Roe Lewis.
He's not done well.
Excuse me. Mr. Meck.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Molina. Mayor Morris.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Osborne.
Present.
Thank you. Mayor Ortega.
Present.
Thank you. Mayor Pereira.
Present.
Thank you. Mayor Peterson. Mayor Pizzillo.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Rodriguez. Mayor Schoaf.
Here.
Thank you. Supervisor Sellers. Mayor Sykes.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Smith. Mayor Walter. Mayor Wires.
I'm here.
Thank you. Mayor Weiss. Mayor Wheatley.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Wilson.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Woods.
Here.
Thank you. Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Our next item is call to the audience. This is the opportunity for the public to comment on items that fall under MAG's jurisdiction, that are not under the agenda or that are on the agenda for discussion and not for action. 15 minutes will be provided for call to the audience. I have received 5 requests to speak cards for the call to the audience. Do we have any additional cards that have come in the interim? No. All right. We will begin with Diane Barker. Diane will be followed by April Smith.
Good afternoon, MAG Regional Council and Mayor Kate Gallego. I'm Diane Barker and I do live in Maricopa County, been here for several decades. I come to you today in speaking for better air quality. I was over at the Board of Supervisors and Mr. Crawley, who's been a resident a long time, we're concerned about what's happening. You know, our state symbol really is the saguaro. And it's like the canary in the coal mine. They've been dropping. I have been on a thread of people that are interested in growing better in their backyard plants. And they're all blaming it basically on overwatering. While it is true, those great big arms get too heavy. In the natural, they may not get, that type of watering that people do. And there are other things. It should have been put in a trench for draining rather like a circular citrus. But today, when I was responding to Phil McNeely, our air quality man's permit on the agenda at Maricopa Board of Supervisors, they want you to do your research before you speak. So I did. And, I was looking at ozone burns. And these poor saguaros have just gotten their innards burnt. And where do we get ozone? Well, the sun is lower and it mixes in, particularly in the United States, in urban areas. In urban areas, we have a lot more emissions. And we do get, factory emissions, and Phil McNeely's regulating that, but we don't get enough regulation on what should come from ourselves, choosing different ways to get around. And I did get my bus pass because I will be going on transit like I did this morning. It's cooler. People say you can't be out there even taking transit because it's too hot. Well, every day of the year, whether it's hot or cold, practically I'm out there. So, and it can't be that bad of a lifestyle because my retinal doctor was ecstatic that now in one eye I'm 20/20 and the floater eye has 20/25. So, I'm out in that ozone even, but I'm chasing buses. And I think if anybody that's going to the gym, they say, go slow and then go fast, go slow. Well, that's like taking transit.
Thank you, Diane. April is next, followed by Charmaine.
Hello, Regional Council. I read an extremely alarming article this weekend about a group called C40 Cities. It detailed their goal of limiting people to 0 meat consumption, no dairy, 3 new clothing items a year, and only 1 flight every 3 years, all to meet a ridiculous target of limiting global temperature increase to 1.5 degrees. This group is funded by billionaire partisan activists who have other ideas too, like instituting climate lockdowns akin to what we experienced during COVID. They have scientists who have proposed genetically modifying people to make them allergic to meat. All of this becomes even more unnerving when you find out that one of the 14 major cities involved is Phoenix. Phoenix shouldn't be a part of this. No city in Arizona should, and MAG definitely should not be. And I also wanted to remark that how much of our ozone and pollutants are actually caused from outside of Arizona. That is a big, essential part of this conversation and debate. I'm also asking that you remove item 5H from the consent agenda and discuss it and have a discussion relating to it. And then I would also encourage you to vote no. Thank you.
Charmaine is next, followed by Lynn.
Oh, Lord. Hi, MAG Council. It's nice to see you. Living in a hot desert like ours, it's extremely important that we have reliable energy. I'm worried about the push for green energy and various climate action plans because blackouts can be deadly, as we all know. Fossil fuels are uniquely reliable as they can be supplied 24 hours a day at an affordable cost, whereas renewables, such as wind and solar, are intermittent and rely on when the sun shines and the wind blows. Fossil fuels can also be transported and stored, providing extraordinary versatility in the types of machines they can power. Again, renewables prove woefully unsustainable in this regard, and with battery technology continuing to be excessive and less efficacious. The inadequacy of renewables to deliver reliable energy was very clear to all of us when Texas in the winter of 2021 was exposed when the winter storm came. All right. Because they had this intermittent and it failed. The North American Electronic Reliability Corporation, NERC, the regulatory body responsible for monitoring the region's grid reliability, warned that Texas was at risk for capacity shortfalls. After years of shedding fossil fuel assets, especially coal, combined with extreme weather conditions, and we have different extreme weather conditions here, and non-weathered renewable technology, 10 million Texans were left without power, and over 200 people died. Please do not consider any climate goals that will make electricity in our region less reliable. I don't think anybody wants to have the air conditioner go off. I don't think anyone wants their lights to go out, and that's a very strong possibility with intermittence.
Lynn is next, followed by Marty Schultz.
Hello, good afternoon. Hot flashes are a real thing, and I'm so grateful for air conditioning and the air conditioning that comes from hydrocarbon deposits. Some people call it fossil fuels. And hydrocarbon deposits are the ultimate recycling project of history. It comes naturally and it's readily available, as the woman before me just said. Few discoveries have done more to make us resilient to our climate than our naturally formed energy resources. Climate alarmists claim their net zero plans improve resiliency, but it's necessary to understand what they mean by the term. For them, it means shielding the natural world from the impacts of human activity. For us, it means protecting humans from a naturally hostile environment. Since the mass adoption of hydrocarbon deposits, climate-related deaths have plummeted. We can heat ourselves in the cold, cool ourselves in the heat, and live in areas with severe natural events, including hurricanes, tornadoes, and earthquakes, because we are able to build structures to withstand whatever nature throws us. Continued use of hydrocarbon deposits will make us more and more resilient to ensure we have not just food, water, and shelter, but abundance and prosperity, as we've achieved without net zero interference for centuries. It seems so many efforts are going towards creating a solution to a problem that does not exist. Any climate plan that would limit the use of the hydrocarbon deposits isn't worth any amount of money that we might receive from the federal government. Please protect Maricopa County and reject any net zero targets. And I ask you to please remove item 5H from the consent agenda before voting on it, and then discuss it separately. And I implore you to vote no. Thank you.
Marty Schultz.
Mayor, thank you. My name is Martin Schultz. I've had some interesting jobs in this city and county and state, and I guess at the federal level for a lot of years. But today I want to talk about transportation and reflect on the fact that several of us, I know you don't think I'm that old, but several of us actually were around when we started the half-cent sales tax and what is now known as Proposition 400, but it was known as Proposition 300 in those days, and created that concept of the half-cent sales tax. And there's a lot going on in the last 30 plus years, including construction of freeways, major arterials, and light rail, where in the early days, we really had nothing, no designation of freeways and none virtually of the other major facilities. But, and you all know the history in the last couple of years, it's been a real challenge to get Proposition 400, ultimately Senate Bill 1122 through the process. A lot of you were involved. In fact, I think all of you were involved in one way or another. Your predecessors several decades ago were arguing amongst themselves on a variety of things, some of it having to do with the geography of the East Valley, the West Valley, Central Phoenix, where the facilities go and timing. My reason for being here is that I wanted to thank you for this effort in the last couple of years, because as I read it, you have had unanimous decisions on the comprehensive transportation plan for this region, notwithstanding your very legitimate reasons for maybe not feeling comfortable with some of the aspects of it, because you're in Central Phoenix or the Valley, you're in East Valley, if you will, you're in the West Side. But you stuck with it as individual mayors, elected officials, and others. And ultimately, I believe, notwithstanding all the politics we could talk about for a long period of time, that intelligent approach to transportation for this valley is going to carry us for a long time. Thank you.
Thank you. MAG also provides the opportunity for members of the public to submit written comments via the MAG website. Any comments received 2 hours prior to the meeting have been shared with committee members in advance of the meeting for consideration and will be included in the formal meeting minutes. Staff, can you update us on online written comments for the call to the audience?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have received 4 written comments for call the audience, which have been provided to the members in advance of the meeting for consideration and will be included in the formal minutes of the meeting.
Thank you so much. Next, we move to item 4, the MAG Executive Director's Report. MAG Executive Director Ed Zerker will provide the update. This item is on the agenda for information.
Thank you, Chairwoman Gallego, members of the Regional Council. As I start the Executive Director's Report, I'm just struck by this agenda that you have that really is a reflection of the variety of work that MAG does and reflects what MAG is, which is all the governments of the region coming together as equals in a voluntary association to solve big problems. So as an entity, MAG has really 2 large purposes. First, we are a council of governments, and you see agenda items today that reflect MAG as the place where each city, town, county, native nation in the region has an equal voice in working on things like homelessness, car, bicycle, and pedestrian safety education, regional 911, and senior services, just to name a few. The other role we serve is as a metropolitan planning organization, where we're the entity that ensures that the region follows all state and federal laws so that the transportation and air quality funds that the federal government makes available, that we are eligible for those for your residents. So as an entity, you plan for the long-term needs of your communities, and you put together a successful sales tax extension, as was noted. That's also part of this role that you serve as a metropolitan planning organization. Over the summer, MAG staff worked hard on all of these items, and I'd like to highlight just a couple now. The next slide, please. One that's at the top of mind that we've heard a lot about already is the heat and the heat relief network, particularly as the heat affects low income, homelessness, people without shelter, maybe people who are struggling with their electricity bills. And so Maricopa Association of Government Staff is the coordinating entity for the Heat Relief Network. It is a network. It is not an organization. It is not a bureaucracy. And so the MAG staff have worked with your staff in your cities and in your agencies to pull together maps and information to bring people in, businesses or organizations in, so that many of your libraries, many of your city facilities, we also have some private sector folks who are providing places for that. And we've been on, our staff have been on national and local network news, and which even NBC Nightly News called MAG's Heat Relief Network one of the most sophisticated networks of cooling sites in the country. And that's good news for a place like Phoenix, Maricopa County. We should be good at heat, and we are. So next slide, please. The role in the network is to coordinate and maintain all the available map of relief sites across the valley. That is done voluntarily by our organization through the dues you pay that supports us. That's one thing we do, is to provide this coordination center. And we highlight cooling centers, respite centers, hydration stations, and donation sites. So cooling centers are places you can just go in and cool off. Respite centers are places where you can actually sleep. Hydration stations where you can get water, and then places where people who are concerned can bring water. All those are coordinated through the human services staff here at MAG with your city, town, county, tribal agencies. And we'll continue focusing on this as we go planning now for the end of this year and into next year. Next slide, please. Another different thing, the Federal Railroad Administration is working on intercity rail program, transportation. And of course, Phoenix is the largest city in the United States not to have Amtrak service, this region, that you have to go to Flagstaff or Tucson. And so the Federal Railroad Administration had one of their regional meetings here in this very room. We were proud to host them and to allow them to enable their work on long run Amtrak type of service. Next slide. And of course, what would the summer be without the celebration of the extension of Prop 400? Many of you, some of you were at the signing ceremony. It was a great recognition of the work being done here. And so congratulations to you all. And also, next slide, congratulations to our staff who are very happy to celebrate that as well. And so thank you for your support throughout this. I will say that the unanimity of this group was the most powerful thing we had in communicating to legislators about the importance. The fact that the regional council and the Transportation Policy Committee were unified and unanimous throughout was a very powerful message, as many of you went down and spoke on behalf of your colleagues, and we as staff represented you. We always had that strong basis to talk about. So thank you for that. And that, Madam Chair, that concludes my presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ed, and thank you for all the hard work the MAG team has been doing. If any members have questions, please see Ed after the meeting. Our next item is the approval of the consent agenda. Items 5A through 5N are on the consent agenda. Does any member of the committee have questions or request a presentation on any of these items? And then prior to the approval of the consent agenda,
Mayor, I think
we do, okay, yeah. Mayor Van Wilmer. Sorry, I was trying to find the right place to get to him.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate it. Madam Chair, members of the Regional Council, MAG staff, members of the public, thank you for the opportunity to speak for just a moment on item 5J, which is, I think, a proud moment for the town of Paradise Valley and should be, I hope, for the entire council. I want to echo what Executive Director Zuercher said about the function of MAG. I've always felt privileged to sit among this group and see the level of cooperation, even on issues where we might not see totally eye to eye. There's just a level of professionalism and care for the community. The town, like some of the smaller communities that are part of MAG, often is on the periphery of some of the issues like the larger regional transportation issues. But we always like to play an important role. And that leads to the issue of homelessness. We've all been seeing homelessness throughout the county, the region, the state, the country. We all recognize that it's a problem, not just for the people who are experiencing homelessness, but also for the communities that are faced with a homeless population. And I'm very proud of the efforts of this group. On a parallel track, it's been my position that beyond the regular funding mechanisms that the town and its citizens use to support efforts to combat homelessness and support those who need help, that the town should take additional measures. And I publicly challenged our council to do that, and they responded overwhelmingly favorably to that. We did have some opposition along the way, but we did reach the point where we had authority to spend an additional six-figure amount this year towards supporting regional homelessness efforts. And so it's 5J that would actually implement that. And it wouldn't be possible without MAG and the work that MAG does and the support of this group. We're really proud that to be able to partner with the city of Phoenix. I wanted to particularly thank our town staff who worked hard on this, Jill Kymack, Duncan Miller, But everybody who's a part of the selection committee, they found a great group, Community Bridges, in cooperation with the city of Phoenix, that will really make an impact on various levels and will not only be a benefit to the town, but also hopefully the whole region. So I'm just very grateful for the support on this and proud to share this news and how well this process has worked. Again, we would not have been able to deploy these funds and go through a thoughtful process of where to place them without the help of everyone involved. So just thank you for the time to address this, and looking forward to moving one more step closer to having this done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for your leadership on addressing homelessness. Mayor Ortega.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do want to point out that this week, the pollution alerts have been issued concerning public health and precaution to the public on outdoor activity. With that, as this body moves forward with the consent agenda items, I believe that we must, address these and are doing so with transportation as well as air quality. With that, I would move for approval of consent agenda items 5A through 5N.
Mayor Dickey, I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. We do have two members of the public to comment. We'll begin with Karen, followed by Thomas.
Hello, I've been living in Maricopa County for 29 years now. Members of MAG, excuse me, Regional Council, thank you for providing me the opportunity to speak today. I'm here to request that you do not approve the $1 million grant for a regional climate action plan. We have seen cities around the state adopting their own climate action plans, which contain radical policies like going to net zero by 2050, changing our transportation planning process to increase investments in public transit, to spending money on road diets and other measures to get people out of their cars and relegate us to walking and biking in our heat, really? These plans are also include changes to land use planning, turning our cities into 15-minute neighborhoods. We do not support these plans in our cities, and we do not support regional versions like this one that will draw down billions of dollars to fund them. Lastly, I ask that you remove item 5H from the consent agenda and discuss it separately before voting on it. Thank you for your time.
Our final comment will be Thomas.
Good afternoon, committee chair. Thank you for allowing me have some comments. Well, I grew up in country where we have regular rolling blackouts. Every day we have already candles, matches, or went off. It's not a fun. So I don't think that much about climate change. I think how grateful I am for industrialization and technological progress that have built things to make us safe in our environment. During the heat of summer, we have air conditioning, we have heating, we have lights, so we don't need to have candles. And we can spend more time enjoying ourselves, going somewhere, and living our lives to our full potential. We should not be spending time on developing climate action plans for disasters, which I don't see being at all that disastrous. And we should be rather spend them on progress, how to improve our life. I urge you to vote against the 1 million grant, remove the 5H from the consent and vote no. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can our staff please provide us an update on online written comments?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have received 50 written comments for the consent agenda, which have been provided to the members in advance of the meeting for consideration and will be included in the formal minutes of the meeting.
Thank you. We will have those participating in the meeting online now take part in the voice vote by turning on their cameras and unmuting their audio. We need to see the faces of everyone participating in the voice vote. This is to speed up the voting process. For those who cannot or do not want to turn on their cameras, staff will conduct a roll call vote. Staff will only call on those virtual participants who did not turn on their camera. Members, please leave your cameras on until after the roll call vote so that staff can count the people's names whose cameras are not on. Can I have a voice vote of those in the room and those online? Those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, say nay. Staff, can you take a roll call of the members participating virtually who did not turn on their camera?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And members, when I call your name, please indicate how you vote. Ms. Daniels?
Aye.
Thank you. Mayor Hall?
Aye.
Thank you. Mayor Pereira?
Aye.
Mayor Schoaf?
Aye.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The motion passes.
Thank you so much. Building on Paradise Valley's earlier success, we will continue with the topic of moving forward the work of addressing homelessness. Item number 6 will be presented by MAG Regional Homelessness Program Manager Katie Gentry. This item is on the agenda for information and discussion.
Mayor Gallego, just before Katie starts, I do want to thank Mayor Ben Wilner for his recognition of the work of MAG staff. I particularly want to recognize our Deputy Executive Director, Amy St. Peter, and the Human Services Director, Kelly Williams, and all the staff, including Katie, who are part of that process. So thank you for providing the resources. It's our honor. And I know Amy was very excited about leading the process. So thank you for that recognition. And with that, I'll turn it over to our, thank you. I'll turn it over to our homeless manager, Katie Gentry.
Thanks, Ed. Thank you, Mayor, and really excited about the additional resources going into addressing homelessness. Next slide. A quick overview of my presentation. We're going to talk about continuum of care efforts briefly, talk through the work of Pathways Home, including an update on Threshold, and then talk through some next steps. Next slide. A quick overview. Each year we apply to the annual notice of funding opportunity through the Department of Housing and Urban Development. This is funding that comes through MAG locally, and we run a local process that then we submit our application to HUD. It's about a 200-page application, as well as applications from all our nonprofit partners who are accepting this funding. It's for about $36.3 million that we apply each year. It was released from HUD July 5th, and our local application, which helps us in our scoring for both permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing, was due August 8th. We are frantically working through the process of evaluating those with a non-biased group of folks called our Rank and Review Committee, and then we will be submitting our application September 28th. Definitely more information to come as we submit that and hopefully hear back on that award in early 2024. Next slide. I also want to highlight some of the work of Pathways Home, and with that, I will introduce my colleague Daniel Davis to provide an update on Threshold.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for your time and the ability to present to you, give you an update. Some of you may remember May of last year, I presented to you just before the official launch of a new service that is currently working and has been now in effect for a year. Next slide, please. Just a reminder, we launched this new service called Threshold. June 1st was our official launch date, June 1st, 2022, but really we started spending Maricopa County, the Human Services Department money almost 2 years ago. Threshold is Maricopa County's centralized landlord liaison service. Next slide, please. It services the entire Maricopa Regional Continuum of Care's rental assistance programs. So that includes the two that Katie alluded to, rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing, that are all funded through either, regardless of funding source, we serve all of them, whether it comes from Access or HUD or some of our local funders as well. Next slide, please. And finally, it's integrated into the regional strategy to end homelessness. Many of you remember and participated in the MAG-led regional strategy. And point number 5 is a centralized landlord liaison service. So basically, think of it this way. We serve all providers. We serve all programs that have rental assistance that are trying to end homelessness. And we also, on the flip side, service all landlords, all owners and operators. And a lot of our implementation was done in partnership with the Arizona Multi-Housing Association. So we have buy-in from even the largest advocates of owners and operators. Next slide, please. So we took this moment, 1 year of service, to take a look back, and we wanted to analyze a couple things, not only where did the money go, how did the services go, but also historically, how has the homeless system interacted or been impacted by the housing market. The simplest way to quantify the housing market in relation to its tenants is the average rental amount experienced in the region. Maricopa County actually had the worst housing market just after COVID compared to any other city in the nation. And it's actually because how occupancy and then how rental amounts grew in correlation to our housing stock. You could see that there is an inverse causation of how the homeless system performs in the amount of people that were able to get off the streets related to the housing market. So the harder the housing market, obviously the harder it is to find people homes, but also homelessness increases due to the housing market. Next slide, please. We launched June 1st, 2022, like I said. The rental market continued to get worse and worse and capped out at an average of $1,660 a month. I'm sure many of you remember getting a 1-bedroom for $500 a month, so we actually hit a low around that time of 98 move-ins in 1 month. That's 98 people or households getting off the streets and into their own homes. And as you can see, the average trend line is now like an exponential curve going up. We actually hit a record number of move-ins across all programs 3 months ago, which is great. Next slide, please. Another aspect of reviewing the performance of the homeless system has been looking at our existing owner-operator partners and then new landlords that we've been recruiting. It's not too complex to understand that people who are experiencing homelessness, when we give them rental assistance, they're going to go look back at a lot of the properties that they came from or areas that they feel comfortable in. So we've generally depended on the same partners and landlords. And so as we have not had a centralized service to support them, we've actually been losing a lot of those partners very quickly. It's hard to understand the homeless system, who the providers are, where the rental assistance comes from, what the rental amount should be, et cetera. And so that's one of the big things that we sought to fix. Sorry, last time I had a clicker. That's why these are all, and they're not slides. Next point. Okay, thank you.
Daniel, can you or Katie explain the orange, the blue, and the yellow here?
Of course. So yeah, that's a great call. I thought there was a key up here. So the blue is actually new landlords that we recruited that year, right? And so historically, the homeless system has been like trying to recruit more and more operators. And the orange is going to be people who have maintained, right? So these are move-ins to properties that already accept vouchers. And every year you could see that our move-in trend line, this yellow here, correlates to the amount of partners we're able to keep year over year. So as people try out the system, if it works, great, right? Often they struggle. They don't have the amount of damage claims and vacancy loss that they need. It's hard to get a hold of or understand who the right supportive service provider is for that household. And because of just the complexities, we've actually been losing partners year over year. So the trend obviously was going downward. Also with the housing market issues that we saw during COVID and the eviction moratorium, we had a lot of real estate investment trusts, especially from out of state, purchase a lot of the existing affordable housing. And what ended up happening is they instituted broad sweeping no voucher policies. And so actually the condition would have kept getting worse if we weren't recruiting new partners. This also shows that the homeless system has historically been dependent on the same units. So during the eviction moratorium, people weren't allowed to be evicted. The homeless system kind of came to a halt because those were the same affordable units that we've been dependent on housing in. Next slide, please. So the first step for us was obviously stop the bleeding, create a centralized service, a centralized 24-hour hotline for all partners to call. We also worked with all of the nonprofit providers to establish what a good protocol is in supporting people in their homes. And then we also started offering damage claim, rental arrear coverage, and vacancy loss. And so the light red here is the amount of people that we recruited in 2022 who continued to stay with us the following year and continue to house people experiencing homelessness. The light green color, I guess, is the amount of new partners that we've recruited specific to Threshold's efforts. The first year we focused on starting at the top and moving down. We worked with the Arizona Multi-Housing Association to recruit CEOs and executive level leadership decision makers of these larger owner operator groups. And we were able to bring on full portfolios. So instead of recruiting 1 or 2 properties at a time, we were able to bring on a whole portfolio of 200 properties of asset living, right? And we're working with Greystar right now to onboard their portfolio as well. And the next year, we actually saw historic levels of onboarding from peer referrals. So it's owners and operators telling their friends to join this program. So that's been really a key success, a key to our success. Next slide, please. Some quick highlights. Our permanent supportive housing vouchers, that's the rental assistance for people who really need the most help. We are actually overutilization in our community, and that means that we will not be taking more referrals to house more people. We've been able to quickly lease up all of the vouchers that we have there because we now have more units and more places for people to lease up. The success rate for people who have a voucher to find a place went up from 65% 2 years ago to 89% this past year. And over our first year, we were able to enable 1,250 new move-ins. Last time I was here, I had just come from being the director of housing at UMOM New Day Centers, the largest family provider in Phoenix. And I know how important it is to say that there's 8,000 days and nights that people spent in their own home instead of underneath the canal or under the overpass next to the canal or in the back of their car. And this has saved the system approximately $670,000 as well. Next slide, please. I'm going to wrap up my part of the presentation here pretty quickly, but just to say, when we launched, we hosted 3 focus groups with people currently experiencing homelessness who had a voucher, who were trying to find a unit. And their feedback was generally, make it easier for me to take this voucher and go find a place, right? So more options, better quality units that are closer to support. And support in this case would be family members and friends who could watch kids while they go to work, church and community supports, and also their jobs. Next slide, please. And so we took that feedback, and that was our North Star in outreach. I'm happy to report. You can just bring up the next couple. Yep. We've been able to recruit over 1,000 new properties to accept homeless system vouchers. We've increased the amount of cities that those properties are in from 5 to 16. And then we've also increased the zip codes where properties are located from 74 to 113. There's a lot of research around the impact, from census data of opportunity and somebody's zip code. So that's been really important. And every day that somebody logs in to our internet-based listing service called PadMission, there's now over 1,000 units that are currently vacant that they can apply to. And these are units that will accept homeless vouchers. A year ago, we had 92. And so that's been an astronomical increase. We had 700 households searching for across 92 units. And now we have about 200 households searching, and they have access to, this morning it was 1,300 units. Next slide, please. We also implemented incentives to specifically overcome unique housing barriers. So we were able to effectively acknowledge the business risk that owners and operators are taking on by housing the homeless or people experiencing homelessness, and also the screening criteria they have around evictions and a lack of income and also criminal history. So we've been able to buy that down. And I think that's where I'm going to cut it for now. Thank you for your time. Yep.
So I think the important piece here is this is a public-private partnership, which is working with the private sector landlords to voluntarily come into the program based on the work Daniel and his team have done to identify what are their obstacles to participating. And in just simply doing that on a very concerted effort, that's had the results that Daniel has explained. And I'm sure that he would be happy to come and speak to your individual cities or your staffs if you catch him after this presentation. Katie?
Next slide. Want to also catch you up with some other remaining options or aspects of Pathways Home. We just collected letters of commitment, which all of your city managers and town managers signed. We collected over $271 million in cash match dedicated to the work within Pathways Home, over $18 million in in-kind support from you and your staff, and then over $97 million in other things to address homelessness not related to Pathways Home. Next slide. However, I am a little bit of a bearer of probably not news that you haven't heard. Over the last year, from July of 22 through June of 2023, we had 19 people entering homelessness for every 10 people that we have leaving. So everything that Daniel just mentioned, we had 1,250 move-ins, but we do not have enough housing resources to move more folks out, and we have more people coming in. And as Ed mentioned during management committee, a lot of this work, this would be 29 people if it wasn't for the work that you all are doing, but we still have more folks coming into homelessness because of the economic conditions that we have in the community than the folks who are leaving homelessness each day. Next slide.
So I know that's a really frustrating thing to everybody. It's like we're putting all this money and time and effort and attention to homelessness, and there's more homelessness. And what that slide, if you go back, is telling you that if we didn't do anything, it would be almost 3 times as bad as it is now. So that's hard. It's hard to feel that, but that's what that slide is saying. Had you all done nothing, we would be 3 times worse. With what you're doing, we at least have, we're making a dent in this. Doesn't always feel like it. So that's just the reality of this work, unfortunately, with the housing market and rental environment that Daniel described.
May I ask a question?
Please.
There's the reason given was economic climate. And yet all I hear is we don't have enough workers anywhere in the valley. And I know it's that case in mind. So are we targeting the right root cause?
It's a great question. I'll let them answer. I think what I heard Daniel was talking about really is the rental market. It's the cost of rentals has gone up so much that it's pricing people at the low end out. But Katie and Daniel?
Yeah, so a 2-bedroom right now costs, in terms of an hourly wage, is $33 an hour. So a lot of the folks that it's a loss of a job and not being able to earn enough income to be able to offset that rental income or the rental costs that you have to pay. So our rents, anecdotally, and I know not just anecdotally, we've seen rents increase 68% over the last 5 years, and that our incomes have not increased 68%. And so we're seeing folks who maybe were living in a $700, $800 apartment that Daniel mentioned, that now their rent is $1,600. And it's not possible to overcome that much of a jump in just 1 year when your landlord is coming through and saying your rent is going to increase. And then secondarily to that, a lot of folks who previously, when they had their rental increase, they would move to another affordable unit. Those affordable units just do not exist anymore. Back in 2010, 90% of our units were $1,000 and under. Now less than 10% of our units are $1,000 and under. Yeah, I want to touch on this slide. When we first passed Pathways Home, our targets were 770 temporary units and 1,225 permanent units. And I know this isn't something new that I've reported back out to you all, but we've made a huge dent on our temporary side. So even though we've seen increasing units, we've gone from 770 to right now we need 431 additional temporary units, so shelters. We've increased shelter 33% since 2020, which is huge. But on the backside, we have no housing subsidies to put folks in. So as we're putting folks into shelter and taking them off the street and dramatically decreasing or increasing the number of shelter beds and seeing kind of similar unsheltered numbers, we aren't placing them into housing anywhere. So there's nowhere for them to go. And so we end up having kind of this blockade of folks in shelter, and we need to put more resources into that permanent housing, that rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing resources. Next slide. I want to also touch on the work that we are doing with the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness, or USICH. We have a federal official based here at the local level, and really his job is to work hand in hand with us to work through some of the federal barriers that we have, whether that's regulatory waivers, different best practices across the country that we could bring here to Maricopa. Our focus is really on encampments, shelter coordination, regulatory relief, additional funding. So how do we bring funding that we wouldn't think of as homelessness funding here to the Valley, coordination with our tribal partners, and a public health response that is really integrated with our homelessness response. Next slide. I want to talk through next steps. We're going to be continuing to work with Kent, who works at SAMHSA. He is our USICH technical assistance person based here, and I know some of you have had the chance to meet with him. Continue implementing the plan. We have so much more work to do. We've had a lot of great successes, including what was in your packet, but we know that without all of you and without together, we can't continue to address homelessness effectively. So that, I'll turn it back to you, Mayor Gallego, and answer any questions.
We'll go first to Mayor Hartke and then Mayor Woods.
Great, thank you. So let me start with Daniel. So could you re-explain to me that one slide that was kind of down and then into the colors, but you drew some great pride on that last figure of 8,000. I don't understand what that means. Is that 8,000 nights per of times residents, or, and again, just re-explain that to me.
So first of all, I forgot to tell you that you will be receiving a printed, very nice glossy version of our annual report, which addresses a lot of these things. Don't worry, it will only be one page next year. But in that, we talk about the 8,000 nights, which is actually because people have more opportunity to move into more units, they're able to find a place quicker. We're actually, we've lowered the time it takes to find a place by almost 20 days. So that figure is actually 3 times what it is. And so instead of being in a shelter, right, for 3 weeks longer than they currently would be, they're getting into a home. And it's because there's more opportunity. Can we go back to the slide where there's orange on the bottom, blue on the top, and yellow?
Just check, Mayor Hartke, did that address your
the 8,000
question?
I think so. So you're really, it's the opportunity cost of them being, I mean, roughly of them being on the street, in essence, removing them, it equates to 8,000 people nights.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
And if you think of the homeless system, kind of, think of it like an emergency room at a hospital, right? We have a certain amount of volume that we can actually process or people we can help. If you greatly increase the amount of need, right, the system kind of gets clogged up. And it's because there's not a lot of places for people to lease up. By removing that bottleneck, we've been able to move people through quicker and then also reduce the amount of trauma that they experience being on the streets, being in their car, being in the shelter. I'm so sorry. What was your question about this slide? Just explain it again.
Yeah, I was not certain of what you were trying to say with the 8,000.
Yeah.
So you took great pride in saying it, but I didn't understand what you were saying.
Oh yeah. Okay. Did you have any questions about this or just
no,
go through?
I'm
Okay,
good with
thank
that.
you so
Thank
much.
you. And just a comment. Secondly, I know when we committed in Chandler to start paying off our public safety unfunded liability, first 5 years, we'd make these big payments and it'd be higher the next year. And because of reform going on there, it was super frustrating to us. But I get what you're saying, and I'm excited about the numbers that we're changing. And the only course is to press on. And this is where the lives become real to me when we see that type of figure. And there's 10 that wouldn't be off the street, even though there's more on the street. And then lastly, this almost sounds like a political question, but it is not. It's just trying to understand the folks coming in. I understand, again, the fact that we're a fast growing community and the promise of jobs actually brings people in, and then they get here and say, it's 110, what am I doing here? But do we have any figures on just how much of that is related to border immigration? Again, I'm not a political question, but there's a difference in mind of someone moving here from Chicago looking for a new job as someone moving here from another country to find hope in this country. Do we have any of those kind of figures?
I don't have exactly that figure. I do have a figure we ask each year during the point in time count, like where were you a year ago? And then we have data as to where folks were 3 years ago and what their zip code was their zip code of last permanent address. So we asked them essentially, like, where were you staying, where you considered that being a permanent location? And 88% of folks are from Maricopa County. So that's not to say that they didn't immigrate here and 3, 5, 10 years ago. But that is to say they were here a year ago. And even 3 years ago, it's similar, it's 85%. So we know folks are becoming homeless from Maricopa County. About 3 to 5% of that is elsewhere in Arizona. So we do have some migration from north and south, Tucson, Flagstaff, that type of thing. And then we know we have folks. I get a report each month of zip codes from all across the country, everything from New York to Chicago. But that ends up being less than 10% of our folks.
Okay. That's helpful for me to know too, is it really is it's our local residents who are experiencing this. So thank you.
We'll go to Mayor Woods and then Mayor Giles.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Really, actually, my question is less for you and kind of more for Mr. Zerker. I was just wondering in the future, because there was a lot of conversation about housing and about the rising cost of mortgages and rents and things of that nature. And I just would like to see what this group might be able to do, maybe in terms of talking to the legislature at an upcoming session, because I sort of tend to believe, and it's just one person's opinion, that the problem we have from a housing standpoint is sort of one based on supply, is that there's just simply not enough housing, given the fact that this is the fastest growing county in the country, and we just don't have enough units, and therefore it allows for landlords many times to raise rents to ridiculous levels because people just don't have anywhere to go. It's almost like, well, you can leave, but where you're going to go? So I'll charge you whatever I want to charge you. But then secondly, I've always said, I just feel like there's also a real lack of tools that cities and towns can use to actually create really defined sort of affordable and attainable housing. And that's always been a huge issue. I've always talked about, I think the inability to have things like inclusionary zoning has been a huge issue. With all the units that we built in the city of Tempe, I keep thinking if we had the ability to set 10, 15, 20% of those units aside to have like a 30-year sort of affordability, you'd actually have a lot more housing for teachers and people working in the service industry. And you perhaps might be able to catch people before they end up in the sort of downward spiral of homelessness. So I would just sort of love to see what we could talk about moving into the future, like what this group, MAG Regional Council, could do to sort of encourage responsible housing policy, not only for Maricopa County, but frankly, the entire state.
Mayor Woods, Mayor Gallego, Chair Gallego, yes. Staff can bring some ideas back through the MAG process and have those for discussion. Definitely.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Mayor Giles.
Thank you. I appreciate Mayor Ben Woolner's comments earlier, where talking about what Paradise Valley is doing. And it reminded me that a couple of years ago that this council said we're going to adopt a regional homeless action plan. And we're not going to dictate to our individual members what they ought to do, but we're going to all commit that we're all going to do something. And so I think this is a great reminder to see what the Paradise Valley has taken that to heart. And they're coming back and saying, here's our contribution. Here's our piece of the puzzle. So I just hope that this is a reminder for all of us that we have homeless action plans in our own communities that are contributing to a regional response. Also in our community in Mesa, we've been working on utilization of vouchers. I mean, we've had underutilization. And so this is I was really appreciate Daniel's presentation on the threshold program and the fact that that we're working with property management companies. We have 1,000, units ready to accept vouchers right now. That's amazing. The vouchers that we all have, are they somehow limited jurisdictionally or I mean, those 1,000 units of available housing, will they take any of the vouchers from all of our communities, or is there a problem there?
Yeah, one of the one of the products, I guess, that we've learned that we're selling is that simplification. So our landlord partners are willing to work with like any voucher, right, that comes through Threshold. And actually, there's a really great story in the physical handout. So make sure you read that annual report where Save the Family requests, we don't have enough properties here in Mesa working with us. And it just goes over, we were able to move in 18 people that month and recruit, I think, almost 30 new properties. So that's been like the big key is that, like everybody making sure that we're communicating to each other and that centralization of the resources, of the outreach, and then also of whatever fruit we're able to glean from it. So
great. Thank you. Well, again, we've been having landlord open houses and doing everything we can. So this is great news. Thank you. And then just finally, I that's a sobering statistic where we say for every 10, folks we take off the street, there's 19 new unhoused people. But I think it's important that we share that, because at least in my community, I've got some pushback from people saying, hey, look at the the pit count from last year. We're actually trending in a positive direction. And I think we need to just remind each other that the point in time count is not a great measure of how we're doing as a community. And so statistics like this, I think I need more ammunition like this so I can go and help people understand there's no reason for complacency on our motivation to address this.
Thank you, Mayor Giles, Mayor Gallego. This homelessness trends report where we take the statistics comes out quarterly. So it is available every single quarter. It's on our website. And on that website is also top takeaways from the report. It talks about the family versus singles breakdown. It talks about over 28,000 people come through our system every single year. Point in time looks at kind of just one point, but we know there's a lot of people who are consistently coming through our system, leaving homelessness, but we have folks coming in as well. So happy to send that out to all of you. It's linked in the progress report in the packet as well. But if there are other information that you are looking, happy to provide that to you and staff.
Thank you. I will reach out to you for that. Thank you.
Mayor Pizzillo.
Just a question. It seems to me that there's multiple issues here. What percentage of the homeless are people who just can't find an affordable apartment, who are maybe making $15, $20 an hour, that need some type of help from voucher systems, and those that have mental issues, or those that are just drug addicted, and then all of those that just don't want to go anywhere but live on the streets? Do you have any numbers as far as percentage?
I pause. The best way for us to look at that is look at primary reason for homelessness. So we look at kind of what are the conditions as to why folks are, why they tell us they're experiencing homelessness. About 30% is economic. So that means loss of a job, not able to find affordable housing, kind of all of those different elements fall into that economic bucket. About 30% is mental health and substance use. So I think I struggle with answering that, because I think oftentimes if you have stable housing, your substance use and mental health can often be addressed much faster. So if we can work through that housing challenge, then we can typically address those things and work towards housing and work towards employment and all the other things for you to stay in that housing. And then another 30% is family breakdown. So divorce, overcrowding in a unit, being doubled up with multi-generations in a family and not being able to stay there. And then kind of the remaining 10% is a various number of other issues. I think we have over 30 reasons people can say primary reason. So but those three big reasons are the kind of common.
And Mayor Pizzillo, one important thing with that is it's not only about who are homeless, it's what's the circumstance of people in shelters. So many times what we've found in the past is the shelters have people who have a job, but not enough income to have a house. So if you can move people out of shelters quicker, that frees up beds for the people who have nothing on the street to have a shelter bed. So it's a whole system you got to move through. So you also want to take a look at what are people in shelters experiencing that they can't, even with the job, get out of a shelter.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. My only concern is I think there's a lot more than just economics driving this. Especially with mental health. I'm not sure if the economics gets better, that's going to solve your mental health issue, depending on what that is. So it's my own opinion that it's more than just economics. You're going to have to deal with some of the underlying with mental health, and especially with the drug and the stuff that's popping into this country and into the state on how we kind of line that. That's probably not an easy economic issue. That's just only for my only 2 cents. So I appreciate the presentation, but to me, it's a lot of facets that are all moving in the direction that's creating this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. And as Mayor Giles was talking about how many cities have updated their plans or taken other actions, it was a good reminder that we ought to highlight those success stories, because we can often learn from each other. Today has been Paradise Valley a day at MAG, but we have a lot of other great success stories as well. So maybe we can continue to highlight those as we go forward. Any further questions? Someone online? Is there someone online? All right. Thank you so much to Katie and Daniel. Item 7 is overview of regional transportation funding policy and programming. MAG Transportation Funding Policy Program Manager John Bullen will present agenda item number 7. This is for information and discussion.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, members of the MAG Regional Council, here today to give a much briefer overview of regional funding policy than what we talked about at TPC. Next slide, please. But really, the intent of this presentation today, I think reflects where we're at in point in time. And that is, as we look forward, we are looking at an election for the half-cent sales tax next year. And of course, start to gear up towards implementation of the half-cent sales tax. And so given some of the new membership, given some of the questions that are out there, we thought it would be an opportune time to give just a very high-level overview. And really the intent is, how do all these pieces fit together? How are decisions made? Who's responsible for making those decisions? How does a project actually get funded and get out on the street? And what are the different roles and responsibilities? Next slide, please. So I'll start by building off a little bit of what Mr. Zuercher said earlier in the presentation, and that's the several hats that MAG wears. Of course, we're a council of governments, but really when it comes to transportation, we're what's known as a Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO for short. MPO derives out of federal law. It really is intended to provide decision-making authority, restore decision-making authority for transportation decisions to you all, local elected officials, to make sure that the transportation investments we're making reflect the wishes of the community. So we are the federally designated MPO for the Greater Phoenix Metropolitan Region. And with that MPO designation, there's really two core elements that MPOs are responsible for producing. The first is a long-range transportation plan. Here in this region, we call it the Regional Transportation Plan. Elsewhere, you might hear it referred to as the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, but they are one and the same. This is intended to be our visionary look ahead. Has to be at least 20 years. It's really the blueprint for what we want to do in the future. The second document we're required to produce as an MPO is what's known as the Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP for short. The TIP complements the RTP, except it's the much shorter implementation of the RTP. It's the first 4 to 5 years of the RTP and provides much greater detail about when projects are scheduled, what those projects are funded with, what the limits of those projects are. Both these documents are federally required. Next slide, please. And fulfill our role as the MPO. So a couple notes, important notes about these documents. We must update them every so often. As I had mentioned, they are federally required. Thereby, we have to follow certain federal regulations and procedures. So we have to go through the process of updating these every so often, at least once every 4 years. In other words, we can't come up with a 20-year plan, wash our hands and then say, we'll revisit this again in 18, 19, 20 years. We have to go through this iterative process to make sure that we're looking towards the future. We also have to follow federal guidelines in their development. There's a series of regulations that we have to follow, from performance-based evaluation to public engagement, to compliance with air quality regulations, to make sure that the infrastructure we're putting in place meets the threshold set forth for us in federal law. Moreover, and a really important point I want to make, is that both of these documents encompass everything in the region. They're not just regional funding. They include all funding sources and include all regionally significant projects. So for example, if we have a project entirely funded through local resources, or a project entirely funded through private development, if it adds capacity, it has to be included in the region's regional transportation plan, and it has to be included in the region's transportation improvement program. So even though this body doesn't necessarily decide those funding decisions, ultimately the outcome has to get reflected in our plans to make sure that it complies with those things that we want to do as a region. And this is important for some of the items that I'll discuss soon. Next slide, please. So briefly talked about our role as an MPO. briefly talked about those core elements that fulfill our role as an MPO. But what does that have to do with the extension of Proposition 400? What does that actually have to do with the sales tax and getting projects built? Next slide, please. Well, in this region, we have a history that every 20 years or so, we come together and we determine a new regional funding policy that really lays out the framework for the next 20 years. Just so happens that this exercise coincides with the half-cent dedicated sales tax here in Maricopa County. So we first started that back in the mid-1980s, as Mr. Schultz remarked, with Proposition 300. That half-cent sales tax built the framework for our region's freeway system. We did it again in the early 2000s when we came together and we put together a new investment plan to guide the next 20 years of investments. We still live under that today. That's known as Proposition 400. It, of course, expanded the half-cent sales tax beyond just freeways to also fund multimodal transportation, transit, arterial roads, etc. Of course, for the last couple of years, we've been gearing up for the next iteration. This body back in 2021 approved the investment plan to guide the next iteration of the half-cent sales tax. And of course, we're gearing up for a vote next year by Maricopa County residents. Next slide, please. So how are those decisions actually housed and how do they relate to the RTP and the TIP? Well, back in the early 2000s, we used the RTP as our instrument to house all those decisions. That is, when we went through the process to determine what projects we wanted funded and how we should divvy out the sales tax to fund those projects, as well as the other resources available to us, we housed all that in the regional transportation plan. It culminated with a vote of this body, the MAG Regional Council, in late 2003. And then that translated into the Proposition 400 ballot initiative that following year in November of 2004. It worked great at the time. The RTP was a very good solution to house those funding decisions. It covered a 20-year term. Just so happened that we were talking about a sales tax of a 20-year term. We could also take into account all the different other funding sources that we had. However, fast forward to where we're at now in place and time. We have an RTP and it has to be at least 20 years and gets updated every 4 years. So it works fine today as we look out 20 years into the future. But for example, in 2020, we had an RTP that went out to 2040, but we had a half-cent sales tax that expired 5 years from 2020 in late 2025. And so there's some awkwardness from a policymaker perspective about where and how decisions reside, and really what decisions have and haven't been made. Secondly, as I had mentioned, the RTP has to include all funding sources. So when you look at a map in the RTP and you see a freeway interchange, it's hard to delineate whether that's a freeway interchange funded as a result of the decision made here at MAG or a freeway interchange funded through private development. So it presents some challenges just from a policymaker perspective. And then, so to speak, the final straw, if you will, is that back in the early 2000s, MAG's planning area covered one county, Maricopa County. The dedicated half-cent sales tax also covered one county, Maricopa County. Well, in 2013, MAG's planning area expanded to portions of Pinal County to reflect the rapidly growing region that we have. So as a result, we have an RTP that covers 2 counties, but a sales tax that only covers 1. Next slide. So we came up with a solution for that. And our solution was originally called the Regional Investment Plan. However, it now has a much longer and more complicated name. The Regional Strategic Transportation Infrastructure Investment Plan. Let's call this a casualty of the legislative process, but we'll call it the RSTIP for short. We also interchangeably refer to this as the investment plan or the Proposition 400 extension investment plan. Those are all synonymous when we use those different terms. This ultimately was codified into state statute as the governing document, if you will, for the half-cent sales tax and our investment plan with the passage of SB 1102 just a few weeks ago. Next slide, please. So I also want to note that when we're talking about the RSTIP, it guides more than just the half-cent sales tax. That is, the half-cent sales tax is a critically important revenue source to fund transportation investments here in Maricopa County. In fact, it makes up more than half the funding available to do these large regional projects. However, we also leverage that half-cent sales tax against the other funding sources that are available to us. It includes federal formula funds that flow directly to MAG, federal formula funds that flow to the state but are made available in the MAG region to build freeways, as well as a portion of the Highway User Revenue Fund, or HERF, which is the gas tax, which is similarly made available here to the region. So again, this practice aligns with what we did back in 2004 with the Proposition 400 program. Next slide, please. So we know the instrumentation where the funding policy is housed, but how does this actually translate to projects on the street? And how do we manage this on an iterative basis? Next slide, please. When we're talking about regional funding, we distribute it through one of two different mechanisms. The first mechanism is what we call the life cycle programs. You might remember these from previous agenda items when we're talking about the freeway life cycle program or the arterial life cycle program, but I'll talk a little bit about what those represent. The second method is what we call competitive programs. This certainly garnered a lot of questions at the legislature, and so I'll spend some time today to walk through what that process looks like. Next slide, please. Starting first with the life cycle programs. So life cycle programs, in essence, are financial management tools. They were created as a result of state statute to make sure that our anticipated future revenues align with our project costs. They function like a big box. They're comprised of defined projects. They're comprised of defined program elements. When we think of life cycle programs, these are the big projects that we show on the map. That map that gets presented to voters is largely comprised of all these different projects. We go through a process to update these every year. A lot of the study work that we do when we talk about at MAG informs the projects in these life cycle programs. Next slide, please. In total, there are 3 life cycle programs. First is the Freeway Life Cycle Program. That is a joint partnership between MAG and ADOT. MAG is responsible for setting the priorities for what gets built, and ADOT actually builds it. The second is the Arterial Life Cycle Program. This houses all the regional funding for regional arterial improvements throughout the valley. This is managed at MAG, but implemented by member agencies. I think it's really important to emphasize here when we're talking about projects that actually get implemented, it's not MAG that's implementing them, it's you all, it's the local agencies. So the arterial program provides the funding to reimburse agencies, but to actually go through the process to develop what is actually needed, what are the specific elements of that project, how can we accomplish what we want to accomplish, that all occurs at the local level. The decisions associated with implementing those projects occur at the local level. So that provides just an additional layer of local control. And MAG, of course, is a very bottom-up agency. The decisions ultimately start with the local agencies, and we're here to pull everyone together. And then, of course, the third life cycle program is the Transit Life Cycle Program. This is currently managed by Valley Metro and implemented largely by Valley Metro, but also City of Phoenix and other transit providers. But as part of the extension of Proposition 400, management will transition to MAG. Next slide, please. So let's talk next about competitive programs. Next slide, please. So this is an element that had garnered a lot of questions as we worked through the legislative process. So whereas the life cycle programs are largely comprised of these defined projects that we know what they are, competitive programs instead represent funding set-asides where the specific projects are actually selected periodically. Why do we do that? Well, these are largely smaller projects. These are projects like intersection improvements or traffic signal improvements, small spot safety improvements. So it's really hard to sit here today and tell you which intersection is going to need improved in 2040. Instead, what we do is we say, we know that we need to allocate money to improve intersections. And then every 2, 3, 4, 5 years or so, we go through a process and we ask member agencies to give us the list of the intersections in your community that need improved. That all gets compiled at MAG. It goes through a very robust evaluation process, and ultimately the best projects are identified for funding awarded through you all, the MAG Regional Council. Next slide, please. So here's a brief overview of the different programs. One of the features is that as part of the extension, we're greatly expanding the number of competitive programs, and that's to reflect need. Next slide, please. So again, just to emphasize, when we're talking about competitive programs, we've been at this game a long time. This is nothing new to MAG. Many of you that have been on regional council have approved funding awards for competitive programs time and time and time again. It's a very transparent process. It begins with member agencies at the local level, identifying those projects that they wish to submit. They all get compiled. They're evaluated against competitive criteria set on the onset, again, by MAG policymakers. And it all goes through a public review process as we award funding. Next slide, please. I won't go through the details of this slide, but for anyone that's interested, I would encourage you to review. Again, it is intended to reflect that there's a robust process. Next slide. So just in summary, we have the RTP, which is a comprehensive transportation document. Within the RTP, there's different sectors, including our regional investment plan that houses our funding decisions here. And then the TIP represents the slice, if you will, the first 4 to 5 years of both. Next slide, please. And so with that, it's a very brief overview, hopefully setting the context for discussions we'll have later this fall, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, John. Do any members have questions or comments? Anyone online? All right. Appreciate your work on that. Number 8, MAG Executive Director Ed Zuercher will present the update for our legislative update. This is on the agenda for information and discussion.
Thank you, Mayor. We already talked about Prop 400 extension. Just want to reflect Mayor Wood's request for us to do some work on maybe a legislative component to the housing availability question. We'll do some follow-up with staff on that. And then just one other thing, not necessarily legislative, but a reminder that next Thursday at the League of Arizona Cities and Towns, our staff will be putting together the Arizona Sonora or Arizona seminar, which will be on Thursday afternoon. It's part of the League of Cities and Towns. I think there's a separate registration, but not a separate cost. They're just trying to make sure that the room can contain all those who want to come to it. So we invite you there. I know several members are participating, but it is a chance to interact with leaders from Sonora, as well as our consul general here in Phoenix and the consul in Tucson. So that will be next Thursday afternoon at the League of Cities and Towns. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any questions? Number 9, requests for future agenda items. All right, comments from the committee. Any comments or announcements from the membership? This year, the Regional Domestic Violence Council will be calling attention to survivors who experience homelessness when fleeing domestic violence. Purple is the national color to honor domestic violence awareness. Please wear purple to the September Regional Council meeting. A group photo will be taken and shared on social media. The next meeting of the Regional Council will be on Wednesday, September 27th at 11:30 a.m. With no further business, we are adjourned.